Each of the debaters has 2 minutes, and I will give you a 1-minute warning, and we will start with the team against the motion. Ellen Laipson, please.
Thanks, Morley. I admire the optimism of the other side that America's power remains preeminent and will continue to be, and they have been somewhat selective in their metrics or their use of factual information. I do think that we have some serious questions about the capacity to spread our military and civilian forces thinner around the world. One only needs to listen to military commanders' concerns about recruitment, retention, the cost of medical care to our soldiers, et cetera, to realize that, there are limits to our ability to serve this function, and I think there is both an ethical and a political argument of why not share it with others. I've heard the other side say, oh, we like allies. Allies are fine, but they still believe that the essential decision-making authority of deciding when to act where to act resides in the United States. And I just don't think that's the way the world works anymore. I really do believe that while the United States remains a country of exceptional wealth, talent, et cetera, and I deeply hope we remain so indefinitely, we should be aware of a redistribution of talent, capacity in the international system, and we should embrace this and turn it into a virtue. We should not be afraid of it, we should not be threatened by it, and we should not think that the United States alone has a monopoly on wisdom about how to respond to the world's trouble spots. And for me, one of the strongest arguments of this discussion tonight has been legitimacy. Michael conceded that we would have less legitimacy than the New York police, but that other countries so far haven't pushed back. I think that's not a permanent state of affairs, and I think that we should be looking for, if we believe truly in democratic values, and I know we do, legitimacy should matter a lot. We should care more what other countries think and what their preferences are for finding the best solution to the world's policemen. Thank you.
Max Boot, you're next.
Well, I'd like to begin by addressing the question that was just asked because I think it's an important point. And by no means do those of us on this side advocate waging perpetual war. In fact, what I believe is that if America takes seriously its global policing responsibilities, that makes war less likely, not more likely. When you think simply about what an urban police force does, for example, cops on the beat walk the beat. They don't fire their guns very often, and the more they're out there, the more they have a presence, the more they deter crime, and the less likely it is that criminals will prey on innocent people. And they can have their greatest effect simply with the same kind of street corner presence that we expect here in New York City. And that's essentially what the United States has been doing around the world for more than 60 years, where our Navy keeps the Straits of Hormuz open. They patrol the world's ocean to prevent pirates or other predators from disrupting the flow of global commerce. Our troops are stationed in countries like Japan and South Korea and Germany and elsewhere to prevent conflict, to deter conflict from occurring. And all you have to do to realize why this is a good thing is just to imagine the consequences of a world without American leadership. I mean, imagine arms races spiraling out of control in East Asia and Europe. Imagine Iran closing the Straits of Hormuz. Imagine chaos and civil war spilling over the borders of Iraq and Afghanistan into neighboring states. Imagine terrorists getting their hands on nuclear weapons. Now, you may think I'm being melodramatic, but in fact, I think history shows the dire consequences of America abdicating its global policing role. And if even 10% or a third of the things that I'm talking about are likely to happen if we give up this policing function, it's an unacceptable risk. And we can afford the global policing function which we have performed. It is not bankrupting our country. It is a very small share of our public purse. And it is something that I think we have to continue in order to prevent the very wars that all of us decry.
Matthew Parris.
Well, I'm becoming more and more confused listening to Max Boot as to whether the United States can or can't afford this role. In one breath he says they can, and then challenged over Africa he says they can't. That quote from Tony Blair that Douglas Murray gave us was thoroughly disingenuous. I don't because I can't. Britain is perfectly capable of toppling Mugabe's regime in Zimbabwe. The United States is perfectly capable of instigating free and fair elections in Kenya. Britain and the United States together could do something about Darfur. They don't, and the reason that they don't, I believe, is that there is no coherent view on the part of the Allies as to what the role of world's policemen would be or where the world's policemen would police. And I believe that one of the reasons there's no coherent view is American democracy. I don't think the American people are really into this kind of thing. I don't think the American people really want this role. If they did, there would have been much more discussion as to how it should be imposed. Secondly, multilateralism. Are they in favour of it or are they against it on the other side? Max Boot seemed to speak very disparagingly about multilateralism. Mr. Mandelbaum spoke about the feebleness of the United Nations. One of the reasons for the feebleness of the United Nations is that countries like America and to some extent Britain have not entirely supported the United Nations. There's lots of things wrong with the United Nations, but one of them is there is no feeling that the United States any longer really wants to make the United Nations a driving multilateral force. Douglas Murray spoke about policing not really meaning the assertion of force. He seemed to call up a vision of an American world policeman as a kind of world marriage guidance counselor or world social worker or world priest.
I must ask you to wrap it up.
Or rabbi. I will wrap up. America has two great weapons. One is force and the other is persuasion, the power of moral persuasion. They are not complementary. The more force is used, the more the power of moral persuasion will be undermined. And I would urge you to oppose the motion and to support the idea of moral persuasion and not the use of force.
Michael Mandelbaum.
Some people in New York, possibly including some people in this room, are unhappy. The New York Police Department can't help you. Morley Safer noted that despite the presence of NATO forces, and incidentally, if you want to see just what America's allies are willing to do in a cause with which they agree, check out their performance in Afghanistan. It's pretty pathetic. Morley Safer has noted that drugs are still traded. They're still traded in New York, within a few blocks of here. That's not an argument against New York having a police force. And what is true of New York is true of the world as well. The fact that the United States cannot bring Chechnya to a successful resolution is not an argument against the United States acting as the world's police force. The job of a police force in the world, as in New York, is not to make things perfect, it's to keep things from becoming worse. And that the United States does in the world in two important ways: by its military deployments and alliances that undergird globalization, and by leading the effort against nuclear proliferation and deterring rogue states if and when they get nuclear weapons. Those are important global tasks. They are the tasks of global policing. Other countries and other organizations have shown no inclination to do them. Therefore, it is in everybody's interest that the United States continue to do so. That is why you should support this motion.